A distinguished man had sat alone in seat 18C on the Boeing 727 on November 24, 1971, where he had ordered a bourbon soda a few minutes before taking off. Flight attendants would later describe him as a polite, chain-smoking 40-ish gentleman. He stood about 5'10" to 6 feet tall, with a thin build. His outfit included sunglasses, a tailored business suit that was completed with a tie clip, which made him look professional. He had purchased his ticket under the name D.B Cooper, when a newspaper had reported his name as an error, D.B Cooper, which had become the moniker that is still used today. Cooper had handed a piece of paper to a flight attendant. The flight attendant, Florence Sheffer, had previously received messages like this asking her on her date. She had almost dismissed the note, but D.B Cooper had insisted that she read it. The note had indicated that he had a bomb and instructed her to sit next to him. He then proceeded to open the black suitcase, and she saw what appeared to be red cylinders, a battery, and some wires. To the flight attendant, it looked like a bomb. Cooper then instructed Florence to write down on a piece of paper everything he was about to say. With this message in hand, she had walked to the cockpit, handed Captain William Scott a ransom note that demanded $200,000 in cash and 4 parachutes. The captain had immediately contacted the Northwest Orient Airlines and reported this. The company had agreed to meet the ransom and stated that the money would be available once they land in Seattle. Because Cooper had demanded 4 parachutes, the authority believed that he would take hostages, so they didn't tamper with the jump equipment. When they landed in Seattle, the operations manager for the Northwest Orient had presented the flight attendant Tina Mucklow with the money and parachutes. Once Cooper got what he wanted, he allowed 35 passengers and 2 flight attendants to leave. After the plane was refueled, he told the pilots that they would be flying to Mexico City, but the captain had told him that they wouldn't be able to make it on 1 tank of fuel. Then they had agreed that they would stop in Reno, Nevada. Cooper had requested that the plane would take off with its rear door open and stairwell lowered, but Northwest Orient had indicated that it was too dangerous. Even though Cooper was confident that it was safe, the plane took off with the stairs up. Cooper had also insisted that the plane would travel slowly around 200 miles per hour and never exceed 10,000 feet. Cooper was aware that these were the minimum speed and altitude at which a 727 would fly without stalling the engine. Because of Cooper's high level of technical expertise and know-how, investigators had believed that he had done this sort of thing before. He had also remained calm and collected and never seemed nervous. Because of his demeanor and knowledge, the investigators had theorized that he may have been an ex-army soldier with airborne unit or even special forces. Once they were in the air, Cooper had told Tina to go to the front of the aircraft and close the curtains between first class and coach. She was supposed to stay there for the remainder of the trip. When the plane had landed in Reno, the pilots had attempted to speak to Cooper through the PA system to get further instructions, but there was no response. When they had inspected the plane, only Cooper's tie and 2 parachutes remained. Cooper, the money, and the suitcase were gone. It had looked like he had lowered the stairs and jumped out of the plane somewhere between Seattle and Reno. The leads into the case went quiet until 1980. On the Columbian riverbanks in Portland, an 8-year-old named Brian Ingram had found about $6,000 in deteriorating $20 bills. The FBI had determined that the cash had originated from the ransom money that was given to Cooper. The original money had never re-entered into the official American circulation. It was believed that it was nowhere in the country. Without the electronic systems that we have today, there was no way of telling whether the money was in another country's circulation or private hold. It could have also been used in the underground criminal economy. Although hijackings make international news today, between 1968 and 1972, it was really common that there would be one every week. The majority was mostly communist or Latin American criminals that were attempting to fly to Cuba. This case was different because Cooper was the first to demand ransom. This incident had set an important precedent for the FBI to demonstrate to any would-be copycats that this crime would go unpunished. They had put in a massive effort to solve it, but they were never able to find him. Then later in the 70s, there was a string of hijacking that demanded ransom and a diversion to exotic locations such as the Algeries or North Korea. Since November 24, 1971, the FBI had investigated over 1,000 persons of interest. Cooper had appeared to have had experience in parachuting, which was possibly acquired through the military. His technical understanding had seemed to develop for a civilian to pull off. Out of the original list of over 1,000 people, a limited number of suspects had come into light. During the investigation, the FBI had made an unrelated but startling discovery. John Emil, who's going by the alias Robert P. Clark at the time, was one of the many who was questioned by the Bureau. During the investigation, Emil had admitted to killing his family in New Jersey some years prior. He thought that was why he was brought in for the questioning. This ended up closing one case, but not the case the FBI wanted. The FBI thought they had made a break in the case when they received a report from a woman that claimed that the Cooper portrait had resembled her missing husband. Although this had seemed like a promising lead, the man had never turned up. With only the testimony of the family witness, it went cold. Other lead was a Vietnam War veteran that during questioning had admitted to being Cooper, but it soon became clear that he was mentally ill and was a compulsive liar. There were a notable number of men that had came forward throughout the investigation claiming to be D.B. Cooper. Two former federal agents, Russell Calmy and Berna Rose, had wrote a book called D.B. Cooper, The Real McCoy in 1991. They had proposed that the Vietnam veteran Richard McCoy, who had hijacked a plane just 4 months after the Northwest Orange Flight 305 incident, was actually D.B. Cooper. Richard had served 2 tours in Vietnam as a helicopter pilot and received multiple awards including a Purple Heart in 1964. He was also a skilled skydiver. When he had hijacked United Flight 355, a Boeing 727 that was heading from New Jersey to Los Angeles on April 7, 1972. His MO was similar to that of Cooper's. Bessel and Burney had indicated in their book that during Richard's hijacking, his actions had reflected some knowledge of Cooper's hijacking that the FBI had never revealed to the public. They had determined that he must have been Cooper, and that the hijack in 1972 wasn't a copycat case. Sadly, the FBI couldn't prosecute Richard for the Norjack case because he had an alibi that placed him in Las Vegas at the time of the incident. But he was then caught 2 days after he had hijacked the United flight for $500,000 and had skydived out of the back of the plane over Utah. After he was sentenced to 45 years in prison, he had escaped in 1974. The FBI had found him and shot him when he had pulled out a gun. He was shot dead. Out of all the leads, law enforcement was more interested in Robert Ragshaw. Robert was a man who had entirely fit the description of Cooper. He was a decorated airborne soldier from the Vietnam War. Robert was discharged for a string of offenses that included unauthorized missions and parachute jumps. In 1978, he had faked his own death. Then, that same year, he was accused of murdering his stepfather, but was later acquitted of the crime. Robert's face in a sketch of D.B. Cooper had showed a 9-point match. The FBI had questioned him several times throughout the 70s regarding his involvement in the 1971 hijacking, but he was only sought to have stoked the barrel by offering vague and often contradictory responses. They were confident that Robert was the perpetrator. The Bureau had compiled a 40-man team to investigate him during the 70s. All they had uncovered were instances where Robert had presented himself as a Swiss nobleman or some other characters in the interest of getting someone out of their money. They had concluded that he was a little more than a traveling gifter. In 2019, he had died of a heart disease. FBI Special Agent Larry Carr, who had led the Norjack case from 2007 to 2010, had believed that Cooper probably did not survive the jump. Larry had mentioned that parachuting into the rainy night with poor visibility would have been extremely dangerous. For starters, D.B. Cooper would have encountered 200-mile-per-hour headwinds upon jumping. With only loafers and a trench coat, he was not wearing the appropriate gear for the conditions. Additionally, the reserve chute he used was a train chute, meaning it was sewn shut. He may have perished into the mountains that night. During Larry's investigation, he had scoured the D.B. Cooper forums and found an interesting piece of information. At the time of the hijacking, a French-Belgian comic book called Dan Cooper was popular in Europe. In the fictional stories, the main character, Dan Cooper, was a Canadian Royal Air Force test pilot who had a variety of adventures in planes and space-traveling rocket ships. Larry had speculated that the hijacker had exposure to the comics at some point and may have adopted the protagonist's identity. This benefited Carr's theory that Flight 305's hijacker was in the Air Force and was perhaps stationed in Europe. Although countless tips had poured into the agency, but nothing conclusive came from them. In 2016, the FBI had redirected its resources to other investigations. However, they still accept evidence such as the parachute or more ransom money. Let me know what you guys think about this case down below. Who do you guys think D.B. Cooper is? See you guys in the next one. Goodbye.